Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today for the Board of County Commissioners Board work session for July 30, 2020. And this is on the I-5 corridor study, and we'll be receiving a briefing from Mark Daly, the executive director of the Thurston County Planning Council, Thurston Regional Planning Council. And by way of introduction, I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board, and we also have Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser, County Manager Ramiro Chavez, and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. And we have Public Works Director with us, Jennifer Walker. And we have Matt Unzelman with us. Yay, Matt. And we also have, like I said, Mark Daly, the Executive Director of the TRPC. And Jennifer Davis also just joined us with the CPED. And so if you want to join in the conference call, that number is 360-252-9020, and the pin is 1234. And so thank you for joining us. And now we start with Ramiro. Did I miss anybody that's joined in that I can't see?
No, I think you cover all, Commissioner. And this is an informational briefing for you. And without stealing Mark's thunder, go right ahead.
Oh, all right. So you really won't steal the thunder then.
Not at all.
Thanks, Ramiro. Okay, let me start by sharing my screen. Give me one moment.
And while you're doing that, Mark, is this what you're going to share on screen? Your PowerPoint, is that online through the TRPC?
Not TRPC, but I did send it to your staff.
Okay, so that will be put online, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is on the briefing documents, Commissioner.
Okay, good, thank you.
Hopefully now you are seeing my full screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you so much for making the time this afternoon to talk about this. We've been working on I-5 congestion issues through the county for at least the last 4 years, but really it's been longer than that. And we're at a pretty critical time. We're expecting that both the Senate and House transportation committees at the state level will be talking about a transportation package, a next big transportation spending package during the next session. And so one of the things that we've been doing as we've taken on this work is really looking at what are those points in time where we can leverage the state processes, the federal processes, to get towards implementation on some of these solutions that we've been talking about for several years. And so it's looking like with this next legislative session, we will have one of those opportunities. So we've been working with South Sound Military and Communities Partnership. They've been really instrumental in continuing this work, and also with the Thurston legislative partners that Ramiro sits on for the county to galvanize our partners around this being the top regional priority transportation issue as we go into that budget discussion. And so I had been scheduled to talk with the board back in March, the third week in March. So for understandable reasons, that didn't happen. And I also didn't get a chance to go in front of a lot of the city councils that I was scheduled for in March and April. So I've been trying to get that done. I really appreciate you squeezing me in because I know there are tons of things to be working on, but I appreciate it. So pretty much everything that I talk about today will come from this first phase of work that we completed with Department of Transportation. Through the efforts of South Sound Military and Communities Partnership and the Thurston Legislative Partners, we received about $550,000 in 2019 to conduct this first phase of study, to look at all the potential solutions to dealing with congestion issues on I-5, and also to look into potential habitat impacts on the Nisqually River Delta that are caused by the I-5 road prism cutting across the Delta, and also the flood risk potential from the Nisqually from that same area of the Delta. But for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the transportation impacts. DOT is partnering with the Nisqually Indian tribe, and they are looking at the habitat and flood risk. That work has not been completed yet. They are hoping to have a draft of that completed by the end of this summer. So this will focus simply on the transportation side of things. I provide this here because, again, that what I'm going to go through comes from this first phase report. And if you want to dig into the details behind it, there's a lot of really good information in this report. So one of the first steps of this was we worked with DOT. They invested in Thurston Regional Planning Council, developing a transportation model, a new transportation model for the Thurston region. That it's a dynamic traffic model. So it really looks at individual vehicles and where they're going, how long it takes them to get there. It is a ton of information that we can pull out of this model. And one of the first steps was we selected a future year of 2040. And so logically we looked at, okay, what are things going to look like in 2040? How big of an issue do we have? And what you're seeing on the screen here is, this is I-5 going through the county. This is 101 going off to the west. And what looks like a red line, those are actually individual red dots, and they are vehicles that are going under 30 miles per hour. And so this is the peak period between 4 and 6 p.m. on a normal work day. So this is not the worst conditions. This is not when we have an accident. This is what we would expect in 2040 on any given weekday. And in that southbound direction, we are pretty much in stop and go traffic from as you approach the 101 interchange from Tumwater clear up to Hawks Prairie. So yes, we not surprisingly, we know we have some issues today, but those issues are only going to worsen as we look forward to 2040.
Mark?
Yes.
If I wait to the end, I'm going to forget.
Stop me anytime.
So since we have this map up, the 2040 conditions, what you're assuming will happen, is that based on the increase in population, 80 to 100,000 in Thurston County, or what's that based on?
It includes all of those things. So yes, it includes our population projections. It includes population projections for other areas. It includes data in relation to land use, where we expect jobs to occur. It takes a whole lot of different parameters into this model to help us figure out what we expect how we expect the transportation system to respond to those changes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And same with you, Ty. If you have any questions, just please jump in.
Yes, please.
Or Romero.
So we looked at 10 main scenarios for strategies to address that issue that we looked at in 2040. And we wanted to look at all the possible solutions, not simply look at what happens if we were to add a lane, but what are all the different kinds of things that we could do that would help better move people and goods through the Thurston region. And so this included things like relatively minor changes, what were called operational changes, things like adding a roundabout on 507 just east of Yelm, like adding a turn lane on the Nisqually interchange just to help with some of potential backups there. It looked at how would we expect the transportation system to function if we fully implement the kind of concentrated growth called for in sustainable Thurston. It looked at transportation demand management. These are things like if we were to increase telework, if we were to increase schedule shifts or change the cost of parking, how would that change how people use the transportation system? The intercity transit long range plan is simply that. It looks at full implementation of intercity transit's strategic plan. Part-time shoulder use looked at using the shoulder, hardening that existing shoulder on southbound I-5 between Sleater-Kinney and Henderson to be used by all vehicles during the peak hour. So that essentially adds a lane between Sleater-Kinney and Henderson for the peak period use. High occupancy vehicle lane looks at converting one of our existing lanes to an HOV lane, and it assumes that that the current HOV system to the north of us is connected clear through Tacoma down to JBLM. That was the assumption for this. The regional transportation plan local projects takes all the projects in our regional transportation plan, puts them into the model so that we can look at what the impacts would be of those. Interchange improvements, we especially focused on US 101 and I-5. That's one of the two main pinch points, but we looked at potential changes at all of the interchanges along the study area, Martin Way being one where we've got a pretty significant proposal for change there. And then lastly, we looked at adding a lane through the whole study area. First, we looked at adding the lane and having that be a high occupancy vehicle lane. And then we looked at adding that lane and having it be a general purpose lane. So
just to be clear,
yes.
Mark, just to be clear, these scenarios, it just says 10 scenarios. These are scenarios intending to try to reduce that solid red line, terrible 2040 scenario that you showed us.
That's right. And one, again, originally this had been budgeted as a much more intensive study than $500,000. So we had to make some simplifying assumptions. And those 10 scenarios are, most of them are a grouping of a lot of different strategies. There are well over 100 different strategies that we modeled that were then grouped into these 10 scenarios. But yes, all of them geared towards addressing those congestion issues that I showed you in the 2040 map. So then how did we decide which scenarios had more impact than others? And again, using outputs from the model, we looked at things like travel times and reliability. And really quick on this, I'm showing this figure not because I'm going to talk through the details of this, but to show this is what you can find in that report that I referenced. So a person, go to that report, you can see all the details of how we looked at the effectiveness of each of these scenarios. And you can look at them kind of through the lens of each individual bucket of metrics, or I'll show you that we also looked at grouping them overall, kind of what's an overall score for these. So again, we looked at travel times and reliability. That's basically how long does it take a vehicle, whether that be a passenger or a freight vehicle, to get from point A to point B. We looked at efficiency and equity, which looked at how well does the system move people rather than vehicles, and also how's the system working for poor areas of the population, people of color, people with disabilities, people without access to a vehicle. Those were included in efficiency and equity. Accessibility, for the purposes of this study, this was access to goods and services and access to jobs, and freight's ability to move within and outside of the county. So this is access to jobs, services, and for freight. We looked at environment, and for this was greenhouse gas emissions. As I mentioned, the habitat considerations are being looked at by the Nisqually Indian tribe. We'll have results of that soon, hopefully. Resiliency was looking at the alternate routes to I-5 and how do the different scenarios affect travel on those alternate routes, like Highway 507, 510, Martin Way, Pacific. Those are some of the key alternate routes that were considered in this. And then, as I mentioned, we worked on this with a technical advisory group and with an executive team that took those 5 buckets of metrics and weighted them so that we could come up with an overall score. And as we were looking at putting together a budget package for consideration with the state, we looked at this overall effectiveness, and really at these areas here that if you can see my cursor, you can see my cursor, can't you? Good. Sustainable Thurston land use was not considered in this because that is more what we do at the local level, not something that we would address through a state transportation budget package. So with that,
Can you go back, Mark, real quick?
of course. Mm-hmm.
I understand what you're saying in terms of a budget package, but I think it's worth understanding this chart that in this study, sustainable Thurston land use, which you defined on a previous slide as growth concentrated in urban centers.
Correct.
Is essentially reducing urban sprawl and following growth management. It looks like was the #1 strategy, and not just by a little, but if I understand the circles right, by a factor of 2. Compared to every other strategy that you could possibly employ in terms of reducing congestion and meeting all these goals that you've laid out.
And so it's yes, aside from the last point, which is, and that's why I do show these whole tables, because it really depends on how, through what lens you're looking at these results. Because Commissioner, the part that I wouldn't make the conclusion that it's necessarily the best option for congestion, because it really depends on how you consider these buckets of metrics together. So for example, if you were simply concerned with how long does it take a vehicle from point A to point B, well, then the adding a lane is your superior scenario for that, and land use doesn't perform as well. So it really depends on what metrics are being considered and how you're looking at the information.
Right. Well, it didn't win in all 5 categories, but the overall weighting it won by a factor of 2.
That's right.
I just bring that forward because if, as a corollary, if Thurston County were to adopt policies, for example, that would incentivize development in rural areas, that would, based on this study, be 180 degrees contrary to the amalgamation of these goals that we're trying to achieve with respect to I-5.
It would make these goals more difficult to achieve.
And I don't see, is Commissioner Edwards in this meeting?
No, he's not here today.
Okay, well, I'm glad Commissioner Hutchings is in this meeting, because this comes up over and over and over again before the board, and this is really, really important information to keep in mind.
Ready for me to go on?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, taking a look at those other areas where the scenarios showed the greatest promise, we put together this budget proposal of $195 million, and we started working this last session a little bit when that both the House and Senate started to have some discussions around a budget package, but they didn't go very far. And so we've introduced this as a placeholder, but we expect that there's going to be a lot more work that goes into this in this next session. And so I'm going to talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. You can see in here the scenario that they come from. And then we also, I worked with DOT to come up with how could we logically sequence these improvements over. These transportation packages are usually in the 10-year range. So we sequence this over 4 biennia, 8 years, just to give the legislature an idea of how they could fund this over the course of a transportation budget package. So what it includes is 5 million for transportation demand management. Again, this is really looking at what are the kinds of things that we can do to reduce the demand for use of I-5 essentially. And one of the big areas we've looked at, because of the state capitol campus, we get a lot of congestion on I-5 during the peak periods as people are coming to and from the Capitol campus. So we've been working for years on trying to increase the amount of telework, for example, that's done. And with the COVID response, we've gotten a lot more insight to how that works and what the impacts of that could be. Before COVID, the studies had been done showing that every 1% reduction in vehicles on the roadway yields about 3 times that decrease in congestion. That we had about 29% of US jobs that could be performed at least at some times remotely. They found a 10 to 20% productivity increase with folks that use telework or flexible schedules, and that it was most effective when people didn't fully telecommute, but they did it about 60 to 80% of the time. So we've now learned a lot more than we did before about what works and what doesn't in terms of telework. And what we want to do with this is take that learning and capitalize on what has worked well, try and address issues that haven't worked as well so that we can maintain some level of telework going forward because of the big benefits that we're seeing in terms of congestion. That's what the graph you see above is this is looking at 2019 and 2020 in comparison to 2019 traffic volumes on I-5. And right after the stay home, stay healthy order in late March, we were down about 67% as the peak in terms of levels in comparison to 2019. And we've been slowly on an increase since then. Now we've leveled off at somewhere between 15 and 20% reduction over pre-COVID levels. And again, this work would be geared towards how can we continue some of that telework to reap those benefits of reducing the number of vehicles on I-5 through the area. This package includes the peak use of the shoulder for 15.3 million. Again, this is between Sleater, Kinney, and Henderson, hardening that shoulder so that it can be used for vehicles between roughly 4 p.m., 6 to 6 p.m. in the southbound direction. Like I said, that essentially adds a lane through that area. Northbound off-ramp at Pacific, this adds a turn lane so that there can be 2 left turn lanes and 1 right lane. This helps keep backups from occurring on I-5 in the northbound direction. And it also greatly improves the function of Pacific in this area. And as I mentioned, Pacific is one of those alternative routes that we looked at and also are concerned with improving or at least maintaining the function on those alternate routes. This actually improves the function of Pacific in this area. It includes 2 roundabouts, and actually we're now looking at a 3rd because these are looking really promising in terms of keeping people moving along 507. What you're looking at here, this is the Walmart just outside of Yelm. And so this would add a roundabout here at 507 and Vale Road, roundabout at 507 and 702. And then we're looking at another roundabout now at 507 and Bald Hills. And what we're finding on this is that these will be very, very helpful when we have issues on I-5, which pushes a lot of volume onto Highway 507. But what we were pleasantly surprised to also see is that even on a normal day, this does pull some trips off of I-5 for people looking to get to South County, they get off I-5 earlier and use this route when it's functioning better, as it would with these roundabouts. Looking at planning for high capacity transit, there was a significant public outreach component of this work as well. And this was one of the things that our public is very interested in, more high capacity transit options, especially linking us up to Pierce and King counties. And so we want to be looking at that and be ready for what's feasible, what would be most effective in the future from a high capacity transit perspective. This will deal a lot with the I-5-101 area. In the northbound direction, it adds basically hardens this shoulder as people are approaching the exit to get onto 101, so that people can get further over to the right, because we're already seeing pretty substantial backups at times on northbound I-5 as people are getting over to the right to get onto 101. So this adds capacity for that at 4.1 million. Then in the southbound direction, which is more problematic and trickier, this is a pretty intensive solution. It creates a new collector distributor lane, in essence, where everyone that wants to, who's on southbound I-5 that wants to get over onto 101, they would exit at Plum Street. And if they want to go on Plum Street, they can exit there and go to Plum Street. Or if they want to get to the Capitol, they can exit there. But all the through traffic would be on their own dedicated lane, clear through to get them onto 101. So it would eliminate all the weaving that we see right now in this area, as people are trying to get on, and some are trying to get over to go on I-5, and some are trying to get over to the right to get on 101. And that's what causes a lot of the significant issues in that southbound direction currently. Martin Way Interchange, this too is a substantial reconstruction. This is another area in both directions where we already see backups today as people look to exit. It creates this kind of half clover leaf and this helps substantially with the backups that we see as people try and exit I-5 in both directions. But it also will help a great deal with the backups that we see as people are coming off of Martin trying to get on I-5 in both directions. It eliminates those left turns that we have, or at least the main left turn here that causes a lot of backup. Well, and so does this one here on Martin Way. So this also improves that function of that alternate route. This also helps transit in that it creates this spur for intercity transit to pull off and better use this park and ride facility. They currently have to make a left turn here across Martin, which can be really tricky, especially as cars back up at this light. In fact, you can kind of even see that in this overhead that right now, if I was intercity transit trying to make that left-hand turn right then, I would be challenged to do so. And so it helps us address that issue. But what this doesn't do is address our other main pinch point, which is what you're looking at here. This is City of DuPont. So that's the home course. This is JBLM. So this too is 2040. This is out of our model as well, looking at what do we expect conditions to look like approaching Thurston County from the southbound direction in 2040. And so this is with the added lane that's being constructed now through this area is complete in this scenario. It also assumes that it's a general purpose lane, but essentially when this then goes from 4 lanes all through here down to right at this point is where it would then go back to 3 lanes, and we see a tremendous amount of backup. This is during that PM peak period again, and if I were to pull back a little bit further on this, this backup in the southbound direction extends clear to about milepost 125. So it is again vehicles going less than 40 miles per hour for about a 6 or 7 mile period, and this is on any average day, not a day with an accident or anything like that. And so we're going to continue to see substantial issues with people trying to get into Thurston County from the north. The southbound direction actually works pretty well with that added lane, even into 24. I'm sorry, I think I said southbound. I meant to say northbound direction works pretty well, even in 2040 with that added lane. And then it also doesn't deal with the issue that we've talked about around the Nisqually River and the potential flooding issues and the flood risk to the I-5 prism. What you're looking at here is it's the same point of the Nisqually River from 1957 to 2016. It has changed a great deal. And the reason for that is that the span across I-5 does constrict that flow. And especially during peak flow events like this big change between 90 and 97 saw pretty significant flooding in, I can't remember whether it was 1996 or 1997, but right in one of those 2 years, we had a great deal of flooding that backed up this whole area, and that energy's got to go somewhere. And so the water started cutting towards the I-5 prism, and it continues to do so today. It's only about 50 yards away from the I-5 road prism at this point. And so there's a lot of concern about what happens in future flood events. And could we end up to a point where a flood on the Nisqually could overtop I-5 at the Nisqually? Again, this is part of the work that DOT and the Nisquallian Indian tribe are looking into currently. And they are also looking into the same backup causes habitat issues, salmon habitat issues, in that all this area over here is also owned by the Nisqually Indian tribe. But because of those constraints, we're not getting water into these areas. And so that's really limiting the habitat potential of the Delta, and also the salt water. So the salt water, that change from fresh to salt water is so crucial for salmon. And the bigger that area of transition, the better salmon are able to adapt from fresh to salt water. And right now, that area of mixing is really constrained, which is limiting the habitat potential of this area. So these have been the biggest issues in relation to I-5 for the Nisqually tribe, and they've been excellent partners working on that with us. So again, 195 million is the total, spaced out over 8 years. We're looking to introduce this session again in partnership with South Sound Military and Communities Partnership and with the Thurston Legislative Partners, and want to make sure that all of our key partners are aware of this proposal and have the opportunity to provide input to us as we move this forward. And I'm done.
Wow. Commissioner Menster, do you have any questions, sir, or comments?
I guess I'm wondering, Mark, is the intent to sort of lay this out so that the commissioners would provide kind of support for this legislative package? Is that where you're headed with this presentation, or?
Ultimately, we're hoping for the support of our key partners in the region.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty that I have is that the state's budget is affected, and this is a significant package, and if this package is a priority, then what it comes at the expense of what? Yep. I just spent 4 hours. I just spent 4 hours in the Salmon Recovery Council this morning, talking about how are we going to save our salmon recovery legislative packages from budget cuts, PSR and all the other, key programs, so you got to kind of look holistically, like how much money is out there and where are the priorities. I think pre-COVID, I could have been on board for sure, because I think we could have found, a balance, but for me personally, I need to see how big is the hit to the state budget and where, to make this ask, if it's going to mean a decimation of several other priorities, whether it's mental health treatment, whether it's, salmon recovery dollars, whether it's other priorities that I personally have, I have to just balance all that out and see if I feel like we can make this in this kind of environment.
Understood. And as you mentioned, there'll be so many different factors that play into that. Like usually with a big transportation package, it also comes out with a revenue package where the state would normally create a funding stream to pay for that transportation package. So it normally would not come at the expense of other projects. It would be a new cost that the state would undertake to fund a transportation package. But because they haven't really started those discussions in earnest yet, your point's well taken, and we'll just have to keep monitoring how they talk about creating a transportation package, where that funding is going to come from. Does it impact other priorities? And we don't have the answers to those yet because they haven't started that conversation. But we will be tracking that closely and making sure that folks are aware of what those trade-offs are as this goes forward. What we're looking for at this point really is, if they're going to be talking about a multi-billion-dollar transportation package, we want a placeholder for this work. And so this is that start of that placeholder for this work.
Yeah, I see that's important to have this dialed up. How does I-976 factor into what we think might be available for this? I mean, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've put my brain around that. Is that funding that would have gone to something like this, or is?
It's not funding that would have gone to this, but it's funding that's not available for transportation purposes anymore, meaning that that was I-976 was a big hit to transit. You see a transit component of this. 976 was a hit to cities like Olympia, where their transportation benefit district dollars were impacted. So the funds that go to pay for this would not come from the sources that impacted by 976, yet there still is only so much money to go around. So it all will factor in some way. And I know that I-976, because we already are hearing that from legislators, is still, I shouldn't say I-976, the impacts of that are another issue that the transportation committees are going to need to be dealing with in this next session and considering as they talk about a next transportation package.
I'll get to everybody else in just a moment, but are you done, Ty?
Yes, sir.
Looking at slide 17, Mark.
That'll teach me not to put numbers on them.
Oh, that's fine. Go to you're one away.
It's a Nisqually one.
The one that shows the
this one
right there.
Okay.
That I'm not kidding you. I'm mesmerized by that because that tells so many stories.
Yeah, it's pretty stark.
It's kind of gross. At the same time as we're commuting and I-5 is developed, you can see what kind of impact it has for several decades. But it can be fixed, of course. It can be mitigated for. But I was just taken by that. And you mentioned that you think we might be able to do something with the legislature. You think this session?
This session, we are hearing that we had already heard that they were going to be working on a transportation package, and I've had some discussions with folks of how do the budget deficits, how does COVID response, how do you think that'll affect that discussion? And at least so far, what I'm hearing is people are saying that makes it even more critical for us to talk about a transportation package.
Well, I hope you're right, because when we had the recession in 08 and 09, the legislature was concerned with that, and that was the buzz. McCleary decision, all the legislature was about school funding. The recession, McCleary decision, earthquake. If there was a major earthquake, that would be the focus. And so with COVID, the focus of the legislature, I'm going to predict, is going to be health, economy, and social justice now too, all combined into one. So I hope you're right, because in order to get this progressed for funding, the state is facing the same shortfalls that nationally everybody else is facing the same thing. And as well, I won't get into much of that political piece about it, but all the folks that were part and parcel of this transportation program would be the legislature, of course, WSDOT. The Association of Counties will be involved in it. Thurston County, Pierce County, our tribal partners. Each city will be impacted by this. So the cities are a major component of this through the TRPC.
Yes.
But with Nisqually, is the Bureau of Land Management involved at all, or Bureau of Indian Affairs? Do they get into this stuff too when it comes to tribal land?
We work directly with the tribe. So to the extent that BIA might be involved in working with Nisqually, we work with Nisqually, not with BIA.
Okay, good. But you can see there's, and this is for the lay people, for the people watching, there are so many components to this whole package. It takes a tremendous amount of time and effort and a lot of work, and it takes a lot of money. I'm encouraged by it, but I'd say that picture there is just, there's so many stories that can be written just on that one slide. That's a brilliant slide. Thank you for
I'm
that.
hoping that we will have more information on that soon, because this definitely captures people's attention when they see it. And soon we should have some more data that talks about some of the likelihood of flood events impacting I-5.
Yeah, it definitely caught my attention. That's the best slide you've shown me. So let's go to some of the engineers and such. Jennifer, did you have anything? Any questions or comments?
No, I actually was on the executive team, and Matt sits on the technical team, although I think he kind of came in more towards the end because Scott Davis was actively involved, but I think Matt's been brought up to speed. So I think the county manager might have something to say.
Okay, I'm going to go to Matt first. I'll end it with Romero. Matt, anything?
No, what I really appreciate about this is that the resiliency of I-5 was addressed, because it's not easy to predict when a train's going to land on I-5 or when a fatality, God forbid, occurs on I-5, and all that traffic gets diverted through the county. And I saw that on one of the proposals was a roundabout at the 507 Vale Road intersection. And I've actually been working on a joint venture committee with the Washington State Patrol, the city of Yelm, the city of Tenino, the city of Rainier, Thurston County, and all the cities on how we can get traffic through this county better when something happens on I-5. Because right now, well, I don't have to tell you, it doesn't happen very well right now. And so I was pleased to see that part of it. That is like the greatest explanation of the fresh to saltwater transition for salmon that I've ever heard. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Biologist on the side, because that was great.
Robin, do you have anything to add or any questions or comments?
Yes, just on the topic of the budget and the legislature, even in hard economic times, the Washington State Legislature passes a transportation package. It generally does have its own funding stream. Now, that's not to say that the legislature couldn't choose to redirect some of those funds to some other priorities like addressing the pandemic, but they will have a transportation package. And if these are important projects to our county, we want to get them on the radar for the legislature to consider them. So I think it's important to get this stuff to the state if these packages are the way that our region or things that our region needs.
Well said, and I agree with that. And Ramiro, please.
I really don't have much to add for what have been said by Mark, Rob, and everybody else. I have seen this presentation. I have participated with Mark and the rest of the partners in the region over the last, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years. From the infancies of asking for $200,000 just to begin the study. It has been a long journey, has been a good partnership. And I have to give kudos to Mark and his staff because the diligence they have shown and continue with the process has been remarkable. At some point, I would love for Mark to give you a live demonstration of the model because as you see the picture of all the red lines, it's a whole bunch of little dots that moves all over the place. And there is a picture of the model that goes from, you know, the normal AM and throughout the duration of the day, you see really how the traffic behaves on I-5 in this area. This is a strategic, I believe. It is worth all the elected officials as well as the staff in the region supports this request. This not even come close to address it overall, but at least it's the beginning. And as we move forward, you saw the Nisqually Delta, how it's behaving. The study that Mark mentioned is all of us were looking for to do that. But at some point, that piece of transportation needs to be addressed. And not necessarily in terms of the capacity, but also in terms of fish passage, because that is going to be a critical component when we replace the Nisqually River and restore the Delta.
So a couple of things that Ramiro said reminded me of things I should have mentioned. So the total cost, if we were to implement all the strategies from the study I talked about, that total cost is somewhere between 1.5 and $2 billion. So whereas 195 million is a significant budget ask, it's certainly far from the full cost of everything that we looked at in this report. And the main reason that you don't see in this first ask addressing the issues of the Nisqually is because that will be very, very expensive. That alone will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5 billion, because we're talking about replacing those bridges. We're talking about widening the span, putting more of that roadway on pillars so that there's less fill. It also includes a BNSF bridge and a Sound Transit bridge and some modifications at some of our existing interchanges. So to do, that's why we're proposing kind of a staging of this work, because it will be a incredibly large lift to address the issues through the Nisqually, and will really need some federal help and leadership to get that addressed.
Can I type in real quick?
Yeah.
When Ramiro mentioned that moving model, and I just think it's worth, I was on TRPC or I am on TRPC, but I was there when they did the presentation, and you know, they're always telling us, you always hear the axiom that you can't build your way out of congestion. And one example of that was when Mark showed the model that Ramiro was describing, when we were doing it project by project in isolation. And for example, you could throw $68 million at that 104, 101 interchange, and it just pushed the problem to 105 right up the road. So I mean, without a massive systemic, a set of strategies, you can throw tens and tens of millions of dollars at projects and they don't actually solve anything. So I always try to keep that in mind as I'm evaluating all this stuff. And I want to vote for slide 6 is my favorite one that Mark showed, which is the one just showing the importance of land use policy.
Oh.
Because that's something that we can do locally here with a lot less, with not spending tens of millions of dollars, but using our good planning and growth management to actually make a big effect. Because if you don't change the number of cars on the road and do that other stuff, you're not going to ever get there. And then finally, for Matt, Mark, you did I agree, you did an awesome job describing the salmon and the estuary effect. But Chris Ellings of the Squally Tribe, if you ever get to see his presentation of his research on this issue after they did some removing of dikes, and he got me to understand the concept that Mark very succinctly described, and it's profound what can happen when you allow estuaries to function as estuaries.
All right.
And I would love to show the model to you all. I actually had it in this presentation, but then I found it broke Zoom. It doesn't work on Zoom.
I've seen that before. It doesn't function, no. So Mark, thank you so much for giving us your time to us. Very enlightening. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Is there any follow-up to this at all, Romero?
No, the follow-up that I will provide to the board will be as we get into the legislative session and how this request is progressing. And again, it's part of the shared legislative agenda, as well as, in fact, tomorrow we have a meeting with the South Sound Military Communities Partnership, SSNCP legislative agenda, which and the intent of that is start coordinating the efforts in terms of the ask. And I believe the contingency for Pierce County is also key in making sure they support this effort. As they fix I-5 in Pierce County, and as Mark stated, they push the pinch point south, beginning at the Nisqually River bridge. There is also an interest because eventually it's going to be starting again cut up going to the north and I-5. So I will keep you posted as we move along on this request.
And obviously, Commissioner Edwards will get a copy of this presentation as well.
Yeah, I will give him a copy.
Okay. Thank each of you for being here and weighing in. Greatly appreciate it and your participation. And go forth now and enjoy the sun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
job,
you,
Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good job. Thank you.